Hey everybody, Mrs. Weiss here. Happy Friday. Today, you guys are going to be taking notes on the cycles of matter. So you need to make sure that you have your chapter 3 packet out and that you are on page 11. If you need to pause this to go grab that, please do so. Once you're on page 11, you're going to notice the section. It says section 3.4, cycles of matter. So I want you guys to focus on that first word, cycles. What picture comes up when you think of cycles? What comes to mind? For me, I think bicycle, more so the wheels of a bicycle and how they have that circular pattern. It starts at one point and then comes all the way back around. Another word you can think of, you might think of, is recycle. Recycling, you might think of this picture, how we recycle old newspaper or bottles or cans. And then once we recycle them, they get broken down and reused into another type of product. It might be another bottle, might be different types of paper, but these products are being recycled and reused. So, the whole point of that cycle shape is that big circle. It's going around and around. When we talk about this in our biosphere, we're going to be talking about nutrients and matter that can be going around and around. Now, we do have this word energy up here, and we've talked a lot about energy so far this chapter. We talked about how energy can be found in food webs and food chains. We talked about all the different types of pyramids that have energy, more so the energy pyramid. So when we think about that energy, we know that energy moves in one direction. Think about those food chains. They go in that one linear direction. When we talked about the pyramids, energy can only go up the pyramid. And then energy, if it's not used, it's lost as heat. If we look at these two bullet points, we do not see the word recycle. Energy cannot be recycled. It can either be used up or lost as heat. Now, the difference we see then in matter and nutrients. Matter and nutrients can be recycled. It can actually be changed into different chemicals. This is that same idea of recycling your pop bottle to be used as a milk jug or recycling your newspaper to then be used in a notebook. So we talk about matter and nutrients. This can be recycled. Energy cannot. So our first cycle that we're going to talk about is the water cycle. Now, you guys might have talked about this in middle school, but we're going to do a quick refresher and we might go into a little bit more detail. Now, the water cycle is extremely important because all organisms need water to survive. The human body is actually made up of 75% water. This is why you need to make sure that you drink lots of water every day. Water allows our body to function properly. A lot of your organs, your bodily fluids, and other body parts are made up of water. If you guys look at this percentage, it tells you how much your body is actually made, or parts of your body are made up of water. Water is a very, very important part to our life. Not only ours, but to all of the other organisms within our ecosystem. Okay, so we're going to focus on the vocabulary of the water cycle. You guys are actually going to skip that picture you see on your page and you're going to jump down to where it says parts of the water cycle. And we're going to focus on the vocabulary. So, when we talk about the water cycle, one of the first words that we're going to focus on, or the first definition actually, is water changing from a liquid to a vapor. On your paper, it says liquid to a gas, but gas and vapor are the same thing. Now, this process is known as evaporation. You guys have seen evaporation occur. Evaporation happens when you pour water on the ground and you come back later and it's gone. Or if it rains and then you come back outside and you see that it has disappeared. It actually hasn't disappeared. It's actually turned into that gas or vapor state. Now, water can actually do the exact same thing, evaporate from the leaves of a plant. You might notice that a leaf is droopy or starts to kind of shrivel up. That's because water has left that leaf, and that process is called transpiration. Now, when that water changes from that gas vapor form and goes back into a liquid form, we call this process condensation. You might notice condensation happening when you are outside on a hot day and you might have a glass of water, a can of pop. You'll notice on the outside, all of a sudden, water droplets start to form. That's actually the gas attaching itself to the can and turning it into liquid form. It condenses into big groups, and that's where you get those little water droplets. Now, when that gas condenses into that liquid form, it's collected in the atmosphere, or we can even go as detailed as saying it's collected in those clouds. When it condenses in those clouds and it gets too heavy, it's actually going to fall back down to our oceans and to our lands in the form of precipitation. Precipitation can be rain, it can be snow, sleet, or hail. It's whenever that liquid comes back down to the earth, or excuse me, to our oceans and lands. It hasn't left our earth. Now, when that precipitation comes down, water that is not absorbed into the ground and that returns back to our ocean and sea, it's called runoff because it's running off the land into another body of water. When water is actually absorbed into the ground, water is going into the soil, into the cracks of the ground. This is called seepage. It is seeping into the ground. And finally, when water in the soil enters the plants through the roots. So water is going back into our plants. We call this root uptake. Now, I would like you guys to pause this presentation and I would like you to go into your packet or stay in your packet and go back up to that picture. You're going to notice in that picture there are several boxes that need to be filled up. What I would like for you to do is to pause this and try to fill in these boxes based on the definitions we just provided. Please be aware there is an extra box, so you will use one of those vocab words more than once. So go ahead, pause, give it a try, and then we'll go through the answers. Did you actually pause? Are you filling it out? Make sure you do so, because we're about to start. All right, we're going to start in the ocean. If I start in the ocean, my water is going from a liquid state, pointing up to this atmosphere, going into a vapor state. This process is called evaporation. Now, if water is evaporating from the leaves of a tree and going in from a liquid to a vapor state, that is called transpiration. When transpiration and evaporation occur, that vapor or gas is going up into the clouds and it's going to condense or go in through a process called condensation. When that water is collected in the atmosphere and gets too heavy, it's going to fall back down in the form of rain, sleet, snow, and that process is called precipitation. Now, when that precipitation occurs, that water or snow is going to fall to the ground, and it can do one of two things. If we pay attention to the arrow, this box right here is going to be our runoff. That runoff is going to go down the land into a lake, maybe even an ocean. Our next box shows the arrow going into the ground. That process is called seepage. And finally, we have groundwater. And if we look, the arrow is pointing to the roots of those trees. So it's saying water is going into that. That process is root uptake. And finally, our last box over on the side here. Again, it's showing that it's running off the land into the ocean through a process called runoff. Make sure you guys have all of these answers the same as mine, and we'll continue on in just a second. All right, our next cycle, you guys are going to have to flip the page. We are going to be talking about the carbon cycle. Now, the carbon cycle is focusing on carbon. Carbon is a major component of carbohydrates, which are sugars, lipids, which are fats, proteins, what we need to help build our muscle, and then nucleic acid, which is actually our DNA. Basically, what this definition is saying is that carbon makes up our entire bodies. Okay? Carbon helps build all the parts of our body. Now, when we talk about the carbon cycle, we're talking about how carbon can move throughout our environment. So we're going to take a look at this picture here, but we're going to focus on the two organisms, the tree and the elephant. Now I'm going to go back to that word energy. In order for these organisms to get energy, they have to go through two different processes. In order for plants to obtain energy, they're going to absorb sunlight and they're going to turn that energy into food through a process called photosynthesis. Elephants, well, we're not going to focus on energy with them, but we're going to focus with how their cells work. They go through a process called respiration. Now, what's really cool about these two processes, photosynthesis and respiration, is that they are connected. They need each other. Now, when we think about an animal, or if we even think about ourselves, when we breathe in oxygen, but when we exhale CO2 or carbon dioxide. Plants will take that carbon dioxide and they will absorb the carbon dioxide to help with this process of photosynthesis. Now, when plants are done going through photosynthesis, they actually make O2 or oxygen. We, humans and animals, need to breathe in that oxygen, so we use it. So if we notice this cycle, this circular pattern, the carbon cycle is showing that CO2 is needed by photosynthesis and O2 is needed by cell respiration. The big focus, carbon dioxide. Now, when we talk about carbon or the carbon cycle, the one major form of carbon is carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide can be used by plants, and humans and animals can provide it. So it's kind of going over that picture we just talked about. Now, on your paper, make sure if you guys did not fill out that picture, you rewind and fill that picture out by adding those arrows in. So, if we talk about the parts of the carbon cycle, we have several different parts. Photosynthesis and respiration, which we just said is used by plants and animals. Decomposition. We talked about decomposers in the food web. A decomposer breaks down dead and decaying organisms. When decomposers break those down, they are actually releasing carbon dioxide into the air. Then we also have burning forests and fossil fuels. If you've ever burned a candle, you might notice that black soot kind of builds up on the inside of that candle. And when it does, that's actually carbon being released. The same thing goes for burning forests, burning trees down, as well as fossil fuels like oil. That black soot is carbon, and that's actually being released into the air. You can also see this if you've ever driven behind a truck or a school bus. When that exhaust comes out of the back of that car or truck, that big black soot, all of that is carbon, and that can go into our atmosphere. So if we look at the carbon cycle, here's a picture. You have a few different pictures to look at. You have one in your packet that's similar to this. And what this is showing is that the different ways that CO2 or carbon dioxide can go into the atmosphere. Volcanic eruptions, factories, cars. We can see CO2 being going being used by the tree. When animals exhale, that respiration is going out into the atmosphere. Okay. So it's showing that there is a cycle happening, but currently we are producing more CO2 with all of our factories and cars and things like that. So we are having a higher influx of CO2 being put into our environment. Now, you guys are going to watch a quick video about the carbon cycle.
Hey there, everybody! Today we're going to introduce you to the carbon cycle. To help me with this, here's Cole, the carbon atom.
Gee willikers, thanks for the introduction, Mr. Narrator. Hey, Mr. Narrator, you breathe oxygen, don't you?
Why, yes, Cole, I do.
Well, why don't we start there? Every time you breathe in, you remove oxygen and other elements from the air. Then when you exhale, you release carbon dioxide, which is me and two of my oxygen friends. This process is called respiration. Look, carbon copies.
But Cole, what happens to the carbon next?
Whoa! Slow down, Mr. Narrator. I've only just begun telling you about the carbon cycle. Just like humans breathe, plants breathe too. But instead of breathing in oxygen, plants breathe in carbon dioxide that humans and other animals make. They turn the carbon dioxide into energy during the process called photosynthesis and release oxygen back into the air.
Wow, Cole, it sounds like that's the carbon cycle right there.
Hold your horses, Mr. Narrator. This isn't a race. Plants and animals are all made of carbon. When these organisms expire, fungi use the oxygen in the air to break down the carbon inside them and convert it to carbon dioxide, which is released back into the air in a process called decomposition.
Hey, I thought carbon was in everything. But this just sounds like living things.
Gee, Mr. Narrator, you're jumping ahead again. But since you brought it up, rivers, lakes, and oceans also play a big part in the carbon cycle. Bodies of water take in and release carbon from the surface depending upon the temperature. This process is called circulation. Also, low-carbon organisms in the ocean, such as mollusks, pull carbon lower in the water, furthering the circulation process.
Well, Cole, thanks for telling us about the carbon cycle. Join us next time when we...
Wait! I'm not done yet!
There's more?
This is just how the carbon cycle works naturally. However, when humans burn fossil fuels, such as coal, petroleum, and natural gas, more carbon is released into the air in the form of carbon dioxide. Also, deforestation means that less carbon dioxide is being taken in from the air by the trees.
Gee, Cole, it sounds like we're in a lot of trouble.
We are, Mr. Narrator. All that extra carbon dioxide in the air is contributing to global warming, which is melting the polar ice caps. We need to reverse these human effects and save the world.
Well, Cole, thanks for letting us know. Join us next week when we explore the world of cheese.
Okay, so the one thing that he mentioned in here that I wanted to refocus on is the deforestation or the burning of the trees. Not only does the burning of the trees release carbon into the air, but when we cut down forests, we're preventing those trees from joining in on that cycling process, meaning those trees cannot take in the CO2 that we are putting into the atmosphere, whether it's from fossil fuels or from animals and humans breathing out CO2. So when we cut down trees, it's actually preventing them from taking that in. It's also preventing them from making more oxygen, the thing we breathe. So that is all I have on the cycles for today. I would like for you guys, if you need to, rewind and rewatch any parts that you're still confused on. But you guys are going to flip to the last page in your packet, Model 7, and you guys are going to work on completing Model 7. You guys see a big chart. I'm going to slide. So what you guys see is Model 7, this section. There we go. You guys have this section, Model 7. Now, you need to read through each one of these statements and you're going to identify if it is a carbon or water cycle. So, the first one, evaporation occurs over the oceans. If you're not too sure, flip back to your notes on the previous page and you're going to identify whether it's carbon or water. If you would like to shorten it and just put C or W, that's fine. But make sure that you guys finish this model today. All right. Thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful weekend. Enjoy homecoming if you go. Make some good choices, and I'll see you guys on Monday.